Okay, so let's move on and finish up with the do's and don'ts of SEO. So we talked a lot about why SEO, what is SEO, how do we rank for SEO, what is on-page SEO, what is off-page SEO. And so let's just wrap up with some of the things you, again, want to do to rank your page for a particular keyword and some of the things you don't want to do. So the first thing on the list is optimize for white hat techniques. And what I mean for opting in for white hat techniques is basically everything I just mentioned today. You want to do keyword research. You want to choose a natural language processing format so you could choose keywords that are going to be relevant, natural to the content. And you don't want to opt for black hat techniques. And black hat techniques are probably not even worth going into detail, but one example is choosing a keyword arbitrarily, like say digital marketing, and just stuffing that keyword into the content. So that's probably not something you want to do because, again, it's not going to be good for the end user. So stay away from black hat and focus on some of the techniques we talked about in today's presentation. The other do we want to do is get backlinks from relevant sites. So that's off-page SEO. Again, it's what I mentioned earlier. It's about linking your quality content to another person's website that also has quality content. We don't want to have a backlink from an irrelevant site. Why? Because it's not going to be relevant, and it's also going to hurt our authority. Because if it's on a site that's not of good quality, then Google's going to look at us and say, well, this site is linking to your site, but it's not relevant. So therefore, we're not going to look at you in the same way as if you were on a quality website. We do want to use our keywords naturally because title tags are what people see first on organic search. But you don't want to use the same title tag on every page of your website. So we want to stay away from doing that. So you want to have a unique title tag for every web page on your website. And ideally, what does that mean? That means using our keyword research to choose 1 to 2 keywords per page and optimizing your web page for those 1 to 2 keywords. So ideally, what you want to do is have 1 to 2 different keywords for every page on your website. We definitely want to write engaging content. So the content should be engaging. Remember, user experience. We want users to stay on our website. We want them to enjoy the content that they're reading. And we want them to go from one page to another naturally. We definitely don't want to leverage or plagiarize or just copy content from others' websites because it's not, 1, probably going to be relevant to what you're writing about. 2, it's duplicate content and it's somebody else's. So that's a black hat technique we want to stay away from. I can't emphasize this enough. We need to do keyword research first before you do anything else. You need to find relevant keywords. And not only that, you need to understand the volume and the competition for each of those keywords. Okay, you don't want to choose a keyword that has low volume, high competition. You want to choose a keyword that has high volume, low competition. But above all, you want to choose keywords that are relevant to your content. We want to avoid keyword stuffing, so don't take a keyword and just stuff it everywhere on the page. It's not going to be natural, and Google's going to be able to pick up on that. So we want to maintain some level of quality with our content and quality with the keywords that we choose. So reminder, when you have quality content, it's always going to link internally to another page on your website with quality content. But it's got to be natural. And don't just build site-wide backlinks, meaning don't just have an internal link to the homepage, or don't have every page on your website linking to just one page. So internal linking should be natural, naturally linking from one page to another. Not only does it help Google understand and crawl all the web pages on your website, but it's good for the end user. It's good user experience. And certainly last, but something I didn't talk about, it does take time to rank your content. So remember the process. You're going to write your content. You're going to choose keywords. You're going to change the elements on that page for those keywords. And all the while, you're going to make sure Google can crawl that content. And when they crawl it, they're going to index it. The process takes time, especially if you choose a keyword that's competitive. So just be patient. If you have quality content and you've optimized for on-page SEO and off-page SEO, then you will rank for that keyword. And then make sure your website's user-friendly and mobile-friendly. So we talked about responsive content earlier. So remember, most users today start the process of search on mobile. So we want to make sure your websites are mobile-friendly. Search engine optimization starts with the keyword because we want to be found for relevant keywords. And so the first step in search engine optimization is always going to be keyword research. So it is the most important step. And so what is keyword research all about? Well, it's the process of identifying keywords we want to be found for on the search engines. So millions of people use search engines on a daily basis. We want to be found for those keywords that people type in that are relevant to the content we want to be found. So going back to the Italian restaurant example, if we're writing a blog post about Italian restaurants, if somebody types in the best Italian restaurants or Italian restaurants in a specific city, we want to be found for that content if it's relevant to what we wrote about. So keyword research should be done based on two factors, really. It's based on the factor of how much traffic or volume a particular search engine query has, and it's based on competition. And really, the underlying factor here is that all keywords in your keyword research should be relevant. So you need to understand what those keywords are. So are they relevant to the content that you want to be found for? If they are, then really the two factors you want to look for is the volume, how much volume or traffic each keyword has associated with it, and then the competition. How many other websites are trying to be found for the same keyword? So those are the factors involved with keyword research. You always want to choose relevant keywords, and then once you find or choose those relevant keywords, you want to be able to find out exactly how much volume and how much competition is associated with each of those keywords. And so when you look at keywords, you're always going to choose relevant keywords. But there are two types of keywords. There are short-tail keywords and there are long-tail keywords. And we're going to talk about both of these here. So let's start with short-tail keywords. So short-tail keywords are generic keywords. Generally, they're less than 3 words in a keyword phrase. For example, Italian restaurants. So short-tail keywords generally have very high search volume. That means that if somebody types in Italian restaurants, then there's going to be a large amount of volume with that, meaning that generally a lot of people type in the keyword Italian restaurants. However, with high volume always comes high competition. So if you want to be found for Italian restaurants, know that if you are ranked number 1 or number 2 or even on page 1 of Google, you're going to get a lot of traffic. However, to get to page 1 of Google or even position 1 or 2, it's going to take you a while because there are probably a lot of websites who are in front of you who want to be ranked and found for the same keyword. So the whole idea with short-tail keywords is it's a lot of visibility, it's a lot of traffic, a lot of volume, but also a lot of competition. And generally the underlying factor here is that if you are ranked for a very broad or short-tail keyword like Italian restaurants, then chances are it's not going to be as relevant. So if you get the traffic to your website, then chances are the conversion's not necessarily going to happen because we don't necessarily know the mindset of somebody typing in a very short tail generic keyword like Italian restaurants. They could be doing research on Italian restaurants. They could be a chef who's trying to get recipes for Italian food. It could be a tourist looking for Italian restaurants in a different city. Or it could be a person just looking for Italian restaurants near their location or where they're living. And so there's a lot of different factors with short tail keywords. So you just don't know because it's so generic. And because it's so generic, if you do get the traffic for that generic keyword, then the chances of the conversion are going to be lower than, say, if it's a more specific relevant keyword. So let's take an example of a short tail keyword. Let's just stick with Italian restaurants. So I'm going to go to a tool called Moz. Well, Moz has a tool called the Keyword Explorer. And within Moz, so if you go to moz.com and then use the Keyword Explorer, you can get an idea of how much volume and competition are associated with a particular keyword. So in this example, we're using Italian restaurants. It's a very broad keyword. We could see that the monthly volume is between 70,000 and 118,000 per month. Okay, so that means for a particular keyword in the United States on a search engine, you're going to get about 70,000 to 118,000 people who type in that keyword. And so if we were to look at the difficulty of that keyword, you could see that it's fairly difficult because out of 1 to 100, it's got a score of 43. So it's fairly difficult. However, if you notice, the click-through rate's very high. So Moz estimates that we'll have a 40% organic click-through rate for that keyword if we're ranked for it. So if it's relevant to us and we want to get some visibility to our site, then yeah, we want to use that generic short tail keyword. However, if we're interested in conversions, then we really want to turn our attention to longer tail keywords. However, if you want the visibility, then you want to use short tail keywords. If you want the conversion, then you want to switch over to longer tail keywords. So longer tail keywords are more specific. They usually consist of more than 3 keywords. So Italian restaurants, very generic. If we add a few more keywords, that keyword phrase, it then becomes longer tail. So compared to short tail keywords, longer tail keywords are generally less competitive and the search volume is not as high. Case in point, so if we go back to Moz and then we look at the Keyword Explorer and we'd actually type in Italian restaurants and let's just say Orlando, Florida, Moz is going to generate some monthly volume for us and they're going to allow us to understand how difficult that keyword is. And so here you could see very, very little search volume. In fact, so little volume, there's 11 to 50. Okay, so that means on average that this keyword generates 11 to 50 queries a month. So very low compared to our short tail keyword, Italian restaurants. The difficulty here didn't necessarily lessen, but it is less competitive. So if you're interested in conversions and you have an Italian restaurant in, say, Orlando, Florida, then this is the keyword you may want to use. So there's a trade-off between longer tail and shorter tail. But when visitors land from longer tail keywords, they're usually ready to make a purchase. They're usually more specific intent. There's more intent involved with a longer tail keyword. So best restaurants in Florida, branded shoes in Florida, something very specific is going to generate probably a higher conversion rate than something more generic. So that's the trade-off. And so when to use long tail keywords? Well, we want to use long tail keywords if we're targeting pages with a product or specific article. So if we're interested in that particular conversion, then longer tail keywords are likely more the way we want to go versus something more generic, which means if you're using a generic shorter tail keyword, you're more interested in the visibility and the traffic, not necessarily the conversion. How does a search engine work? So let's talk about that for a minute. So we know that millions of people use search engines. We know that we want to be found on search engines, but how do we actually get our content in the search engines? So that's the important part that we need to understand if we have our own website and we have our content. So these search engines want your content in their search engine index. So how do they get your content? Well, they send out bots or files, and we'll just call them spiders. So they send out these spiders to crawl your website. And the whole idea behind using the insect spider is because we're talking about the World Wide Web. And so if Google, for example, sends a bot to your website, they're going to crawl your website and spider your website. They're creating a web of pages. So all they're doing is following links. And every page and link that they hit, they're going to bring back to their server. So these spiders scan your websites, they just follow links, and they take all the pages and content that they're able to gather when they hit your website, and they're going to pull all that information back into their own index. So if you think about Google, they're crawling or spidering millions and billions of websites. All those millions and billions of websites are sitting on Google servers. So when somebody does do a search query, Google, because they have all these websites in their index, are able to quickly determine which website is the most relevant for that search engine query. So that's generally how search engines work. So let's talk about the types of SEO. So if we want our website to be found on these search engines and Google or these search engines have crawled our website, then what we want to do is we want to basically look at it from a two-pronged perspective. It's a two-pronged strategy. So the first strategy we're going to talk about today is on-page SEO. So those are on-page SEO is defined as what we do on our website to be relevant for search engine query on a search engine. So again, on-page SEO is what we do to our own website. Off-page SEO is the second part of that SEO strategy. And off-page SEO determines what we do off our website to be relevant for search engine query. And so off-page SEO generally is synonymous with link building. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. But really, when you want to do SEO, when you want to be found for a keyword on a search engine, you're going to have to apply both on-page SEO and off-page SEO. So let's talk about on-page SEO. And so this is the first part of our SEO effort. We want to focus on-page SEO first. And so on-page SEO is the method of optimizing elements of web pages. Remember, these are all the items we want to do on our website to be relevant for certain search queries. So it's basically, the idea behind this is to make our web pages more relevant for specific search queries on search engines. And so there are a number of different elements on our website, on a particular web page, that we want to manipulate or optimize, if you will, to be relevant for a search engine query. And so let's start around the idea that there's a number of things you can do. So let's start with schema first. And so schema is nothing more than, it's a collaborative effort between Bing, Yahoo, Baidu, Google. And the idea is really, they want to understand more about the content of your website. And so the idea behind this is that you want to be able to provide snippets of information to these search engines so they understand a little bit more about what your web page is trying to portray or convey, so that they can find out exactly what's relevant to that search engine query. So it's nothing more than microdata or bits of information that you can add to your website or web page in order to provide a little bit more enhanced information to the search engines. So if you think about it, it's collaborating with the search engine. So the more basic information you share with the search engines, the better off they have to understand what your web page or website is all about. And so the more information they have, the better of an opportunity you have to be ranked for that search engine query. And so if you have a website with reviews, if you have a website with images, if you have, let's say, a website with products with prices, in other words, you have an e-commerce website and you're trying to sell products. Well, to me, you want to employ schema because, again, schema is snippets of information that are provided to the search engine so they can better understand. So you can certainly provide snippets of information in the terms of images or prices or particular products and how much is left in stock. So all this information, these bits of information, you can provide to the search engine so that they can better understand what it is you're trying to sell, how much it costs, how much is in inventory, what people think about the product, etc. So if you have a website that sells products, you probably want to employ schema. And so when you do employ schema, again, snippets of information provided to the search engines. The search engines are going to better understand, and then they're going to present that information in the search engine results. So if you have ratings and reviews, you can provide snippets of information to the search engines. The search engines, in turn, are going to present that information in the search engine results. So if you have positive reviews, then somebody typing in this example, shoes, they're going to be able to see that you have positive reviews for your website. So that's the whole idea behind schema, is to provide snippets of information. So again, it's not just related to reviews, also for images. So if you have images, you can provide snippets of information to the search engine so they can see, what the shoe actually looks like when they type in this example, Puma shoes. Or like I mentioned, inventory. Snippets of information about your inventory. The search engines are going to provide that information in search engine results. So if somebody's looking for women's training shoes or women's Puma shoes, and they see your product and they see, oh, this is in stock, Great, let me go to this website and purchase these shoes. So that's the whole idea behind schema, is making sure you present information critical to your website so that the search engines better understand what your website's all about. It also helps with relevancy, because the more those search engines know about your website, the more relevant your website becomes, and the better chance you have to rank for a particular keyword. There's also some other information here involved with schema, and those are site links. So site links, additional pages on your website, okay, that show up in the search engine result. And so again, the more information a search engine has about you, the better chance you have to be found, the better chance you have to get a click. So site links are just additional links on your site that appear in search engine results. And that's all a benefactor of having schema. So here you can see in this example, we have additional web pages that show under a certain search engine result. And so by having more links in the search engine results, you have a better chance of getting the click. So if you want more information about schema, I would recommend going to schema.org. So when you go to schema.org, you can actually click on a link that allows you to see all the information you need to get started with schema.org. Okay, so it's got a lot of information available to you. It describes what it is you have to do in order to get your information and set for the search engines to better understand. Focus on for on-page SEO is title tag. And so title tag is what shows up in the search engine results. So if you've ever done a search engine query, meaning you've gone to Google, typed in a query using a keyword like Italian restaurants, you're going to see specific search engine results. And the title tag is what appears in those search engine results. So a title tag is important because it's the title of a web page that appears in those results. And so the title tag is something that's important because if we want to be found for a specific keyword, we want to make sure that keyword is in the title tag, because that keyword is going to describe what the page is all about. And so if we want to be found for that keyword, let's just say Italian restaurants in Florida, for example, that's going to be part of our title tag. So when somebody types in that particular keyword query, Italian restaurants in Florida, then we have a good chance of showing up, because the title tag, which is the title of the page, is going to have that particular query in it. And so you can edit the title tag. And when you edit the title tag, you want to be able to put that particular keyword in the title tag. So if we do a search on Google, for example, so if I go to google.com and I type in Italian restaurants in Florida, here I can see under the local search results, and here I could see Italian restaurants in Florida, Central Florida, Italian restaurants in Miami. So you could see that these are highlighted. So the title tag is not only stands out, but allows you to showcase exactly what your page is all about, and it helps with the relevancy of that keyword query. So when you're trying to optimize your website using the title tag for a specific keyword, you want to keep in mind a couple parameters, because title tags show up in the search engine results, but certain search engines, particularly Google, has character limits around the number of characters you can use in the title tag. And so we want to keep that in mind. So ideally, we want to format our title tag appropriately. And so to me, the most optimal way to optimize a title tag using a particular keyword that you want to be found for is to use that keyword in the title tag and then separate that with your brand name. So if you actually have two keywords, then you can use the primary keyword first, then the secondary keyword, and then the brand name. So to me, this is the most optimal format, but keep in mind there are character limits. But if you look at this format, to me, it's the most easiest format to abide by because it makes your title tag more relevant. You don't have to worry about necessarily fitting in excess keywords in the title tag because, again, the title tag has character limits. So if we take a look at our example in Google search results, if you go over those limits, and the title tag is generally between 60 and 65 characters long. And so if you go over those limits, let's just say your title tag is more than 65 characters, Google, in this case, is going to cut off the characters. And so here you can see the ellipses after the title tag. Now, if you follow the format that we at Simply Learn recommend, you could see if our keyword is Italian restaurants in Florida, and then separated by the brand name, this gives you an optimal format for the title tag. It also makes it relevant for the keyword query. So you want to keep that title tag probably no more than 60 characters, because if you flirt with putting more than 60 characters, then the search engines are going to cut off that title tag, and then that's not going to look good, and it's going to also become less relevant. So we want to keep the character counts in mind. So if you abide by that format of the keyword, and then maybe the secondary keyword if you have one, separated by the brand name, then you should be good to go with making sure your title tag is relevant for that keyword query. So let's then turn our attention to the meta description. So the meta description is just a short description about the content on your web page. So if the title tag is the title of the web page, the meta description describes the page. Okay, so it's a description about what that page is. So the meta description appears under the title tag and then the URL. So if we go back to our Google search results, we look here, Italian restaurants in Florida, Maggiano's Little Italy is the brand or the restaurant. We could see the URL, which is underneath the title tag. And then here we could see the meta description. And so with the meta description, you have a little bit more room to work with in terms of character count. But the meta description, just like the title tag, is just as important because 1, it shows up in the search engine results. 2, it describes what the page is all about. And 3, it allows you to optimize the meta description so the meta description becomes more relevant for that search query that somebody types into that particular search engine. So the optimal length for a meta description, you can go up to 300 characters, but I would not even recommend even flirting with that limit, because just like the title tag, search engines, in the case of Google, will actually cut off the meta description. So if we look here back at our search results, if you go over those limits, you'll see that the search engines will cut off the copy of the meta description and they'll just put ellipses. So we don't necessarily want to go over those limits. So my recommendation is to keep that meta description probably 165 characters to no more than 200. Because we're trying to describe not only what the page is all about, but we're also trying to optimize that meta description so it becomes relevant for the search engine query. And so you want to keep it short and concise. So if we look at our example here, Italian restaurants in Florida, Maggiano's does a good job. It said, book an event space, make a reservation at Maggiano's in Florida to enjoy delicious, view maps, menus, and more. So very concise meta description. It includes their keyword query that they want to be found for, Italian restaurants in Florida. And so to me, it's short and concise, describes what the page is all about, and allows them to fit it all in within the character limits. So here in this example, we want to be found for Amazon Puma shoes. So the brand here is Amazon. So Amazon wants to include, Puma shoes, not only in the title tag, but they want to try and fit that into the meta description. However, the whole idea behind the meta description, more than anything else, is describe what the page is all about. Okay, you want to be relevant for the search engine query, but you also want to sound natural as well. You want to be able to really, the whole idea between the title tag and a meta description is to get people to click on your link. Because remember, there are 9 other listings on the Google search engine results page for page 1. So we want our meta description and our title tag to stand out. So we want it to be relevant, but we want it to stand out. So it's important you write that meta description according to what the page is all about, but you want it to stand out uniquely and accordingly. So once you've done the title tag and the meta description, you want to focus your attention on the header tag. And so header tags are used on a web page to really separate out content. And so you have headers and subheaders. And so ideally, you want to be able to optimize the header tag and the subheader. And so if we think about headers, there's a hierarchy for headers. So there's between a header 1 and a header 6. And so we'll just shorten the word header and we'll call it an H1. So H1 is really at the top of the hierarchy for headers. And so if we use a H1 on our web page, then what we're trying to explain to the search engines is, listen, this particular keyword phrase in our header is a header, and we're trying to emphasize what it is we're trying to say. And that's how really the search engines interpret headers. They see an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. They know that if you're using an H1, you're trying to really emphasize something. So if you put that keyword in the header tag, what you're telling the search engines is, hey, I'm really emphasizing this particular keyword. And so the search engine will interpret that as important. And if you use your keyword in that header, then really what you're saying is, hey, this keyword is really relevant to that query. So naturally, the other benefit of a header is it really breaks up the page as well. So the header, you can use subheaders, and subheaders are nothing more than, say, a lower H tag. So if you have a header that's an H1, you can use an H2 or an H3 as a subheader, and so forth and so on, because what you're really trying to do is not only organize the content in your web page, but you're trying to emphasize that for Google. So if something's an H2 or an H6, you're basically telling Google or the other search engines, this is not as important as, say, an H1. So if we take a look at our example that we've been using for Italian restaurants in Florida, and if we click on Maggiano's, we could see that they're using headers. So if we click on Maggiano's, we could see that this is a header here. We want to bring everyone together at Maggiano's Italian restaurant in Florida. So they're using that header to break up the text. Here you can see they're using another header here, excellent Italian food and an excellent experience to match. So that's a header to break up the content. Okay, they're not using subheaders. They're using headers, but that's fine. They're really trying to emphasize the content by putting in that header. And so headers help not only organize the content, but they help emphasize the actual keyword it is you want Google to recognize. So if we're not sure if something is a header, we could simply just mouse over what we think is a header, and we can just right click. And if you right click on something, you're going to see a menu. And if we click Inspect Element, then basically what that browser, in this case Firefox, is going to do is show us the HTML of that particular thing, of that item that we right-clicked. So here we could see, in this particular case, this is an H2 tag. So it's an H2. So if we scroll down and we mouse over this, we could see this is also an H2 as well. So this particular page is using H2 tags, not H1, but an H2. So what they're explaining or trying to convey to the search engines is, listen, this is an H2, it's still relevant. We're still trying to put emphasis on it, but not as much. So we want to be able to use our H1s and our H2s accordingly. So remember, an H1 is you're providing the search engines with information by telling them, hey, this is the most relevant, we're putting emphasis on this keyword. An H2 not as much as an H1, and an H3 not as much as an H2. So use your headers accordingly, not only just to break up the text, not only for styling, but for emphasis for the search engines. So headers are very important elements for on-page SEO. Okay, let's turn our attention to the URL structure. Okay, so URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. And so our URL is the specific location of a web page on the internet. So basically, if we're found in the search engine results, one of our web pages are going to go along with the title tag and the meta description in the search engine results page. So if I go back to our search engine results for Italian restaurants in Florida, we could see that the particular URL in question here is locations.maggianos.com/Florida. So that's the URL that shows up along with the title tag and the meta description. So if we click on that link, that's exactly where we're going to go. So URL structure is important for on-page SEO. So why is it important? Because not only does it show people where they're going, but we have an opportunity to optimize that URL for the search engines to make our URL more relevant for that search query. So just like the title tag, just like the meta description, just like the headers, we can also manipulate the URL. So if we look at a URL, it consists of really the protocol. And the protocol means it's either a secure site or a non-secure site. So in this example, we could see it's HTTPS, and that means it's a secure site. And so ideally, search engines like web pages or websites that are secure. So after the protocol, you're going to see the domain, and then after the domain, you're going to see subdirectories. Okay, so that's generally the breakout with URL structures. You have the protocol, the domain, and subdirectories, and then you may have more subdirectories. So if we go back to the example we've been working with, if I go back to Maggiano's, you could see here, this is a secure site, HTTPS. You could see the domain. In this case, it's actually a subdomain. So Maggianos.com is the domain, but they decided to put locations.maggianos.com. And that's okay. We call that a subdomain. And then here you could see they have one particular subdirectory after the domain, and that's Florida. So a well-structured URL not only provides the users with information about where they're going when they click on your link in the search engine results, but more importantly, it also provides the search engines and some information about what the web page is all about. So going back to our simple example with Maggiano's, the search engines know that, hey, if somebody clicks on this link, they're going to a page about Florida. Pretty simple. The URL structure is pretty simple to understand. We know it's a secure site, we know it's Maggianos.com, and we know the subpage is Florida, or the subdirectory is Florida. You want to be careful, like everything else in SEO, there are parameters. Just like the title tag has parameters up to 65 characters, the meta description tag has a limit of up to 165 characters. A well-structured URL also has character counts. But the idea here is we don't want to get into numbers when we talk about character counts for URL structure. Really, the rule of thumb or the best practice for URL is to keep it short and understandable. Okay? If we keep it clear and concise, not only does the end user know where they're going, but the search engines know what the page is all about. So the rule of thumb is always, if you don't understand the URL or what it means, then the search engines are likely not going to understand what the URL means. We want to keep the number of directories and subdirectories to a limit. So ideally here, you could see in this example, xyz.com. If we want to optimize that URL, we could put the targeted keyword in the URL if we'd like to. But we want to keep it probably to a minimum of 1 to 2 subdirectories. The shorter the amount of subdirectories, the better off we are, because that means that not only the end user will understand the URL, but the search engines will understand the URL as well. So we always want to make sure that URL is readable, again, for the end user and the search engine. And so in this example, you could see amazon.com/mens-shoes/sneakers/Puma. Very easy to understand. As an end user, I know that I'm going to a Puma page for men on amazon.com. Now, when you get into URLs with dynamic parameters in them, then ideally, you as an end user is not going to really know where you're going to go. So in the example here, the middle example, I can see that I'm going maybe to a shoes page, but I have no idea what the rest of that URL means. And in the other example, where you have a very low URL readability, I have no idea as an end user where I'm going to go. So as an end user, I need to be able to have confidence in knowing where I'm going to go once I click on a link in the search engine results. So if I don't have that confidence, if I don't understand what the URL is, then the search engines aren't going to understand as well. And it's not going to bode well in terms of relevancy. And again, the URL structure is an important factor for being relevant. And if we're not relevant, then the chances of us ranking higher is not going to be as good because our URL is not readable. So ideally what we want to do is make sure we're using keywords that the end user and the search engines understand. And if we need to separate out those keywords, in the first example we could see men's shoes, we want to separate that out with a hyphen. And so ideally, if you have a URL that's readable and it's short, and concise, then again, your chances of ranking higher on the search engine results page bodes better than if you have a very long, antiquated, unreadable URL.